Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Poets Corner workshop at Abrons Art Center, brought to you by Oya Group. I'd like to thank Arts and Rhymes for streaming our live workshop on YouTube. Also, I want to introduce our live artist, Ryan Lopez. Yeah, give it up for Ryan. All right, and without further ado, I want to introduce you to your instructor of the evening, Rich Villar. Give it up for Rich Villar.
Okay, what's going on, folks? Whoa, a poem to start. Let's kind of break the ice a little bit. There's a thing called an Ars Poetica, which is basically a poem about the art of poetry. This is my poem about the art of teaching. So it's a little bit of both. It's called Poem in which the poet attempts to teach children on a walking tour of their own neighborhood about the purpose of urban poetry, completely ignoring the tree and the river in front of his face. That's the whole title. On the 174th Street Bridge, spanning the Bronx River, what you tell your children about the nature of poetry is that it's not so much about their cadence as it is about what they are able to record between their mama's Con Ed bill and the scattering cucaracha, because their mamas were here before them and the cucaracha will be here after the last bomb drops. And shit like that could be considered pastoral, since nature poems in the urban setting involve concrete and brick, weeds and trees bursting through unfriendly ground to snake around the rusted necks of overpasses, project brick compared to French cathedrals, winter sealed inside by landlords who resemble Ronald Reagan. And you are satisfied with your lesson because you've taught your children to see the Bronx as it is. But the flaw in your theory is named Gerald, and he's Puerto Rican, and he is Gerald, not Jerry, not salsa or bachata or bad language, and he keeps to himself as you walk and talk the language of spray paint and breakdance, and he does not know who Africa Bambaataa is, but there is a bottle in the grass near the river, which you can see if you crane your neck. It says East Tremont Bottling Company, and it reminds you of the anecdote of the jar by Wallace Stevens, who is suddenly the realest motherfucker you ever met. And Gerald will tell you without words that it's been there since the river was the river. And there's a river underneath your feet which was never meant to be a sewer, which is older than hip-hop and you, older even than poetry. And because there are green bottles in the trees over your head, dozens of them filled with water and totems, bottles which ring and harmonize every time the wind picks up, Gerald calls them muerte bottles, because this is his neighborhood. And his cousins' names are made of glass now. And that's what they do to remember the dead here. And this information overwhelms you because suddenly you realize that a teen on a bridge between a river and a tree knows more about surviving than you will ever be able to teach her about the poetics of struggle. Because he's only enacting the erratic line structure of a walk home that is never the same from one sunset to the next. Because your lack of faith keeps you from simply hearing a green wind chime, simply harmonizing with a river, simply flowing beneath a bridge, simply plainly, or speaking to Oshun, a child teaching a teacher with no words needed to explain. All right, so there you go. Y'all can applaud if you like. Right, yes. The essence of New Yorican poetry is the live experience, right? So it's always audience and poet, and there's always applause, and sometimes there's some ruckus, back and forth, which is all good. I want to start with a really quick writing prompt. So those of you who just walked in, you might want to sit and just get comfortable, because we're gonna walk right into writing. Okay? I'm gonna give you a music cue. And the reason I'm giving you that particular music cue is for a reason. Partially in tribute to a friend, and partially because this is something that I normally do with my students. I want you to write to a particular piece of music. Think about what emotions it's evoking. Think about the emotions that you brought in the room, right? But don't overthink too much about subject. I want you to think more about what your spirit is feeling right now, okay? All of you have flesh and bone bodies, but all of you have a spirit that is only yours. I want you to try to write from that, okay? And I want you to try to let that music guide you forward, all right? So can we get that music cue, please? And just while this song is playing, we're gonna write, and that's gonna be our little warm up, all right? You'll find out what the music is shortly. I'll tell you what it is after it's done. There we go. Súbelo un poco, si puedes. So for the next 3 minutes or so, finish up what you got. Keep writing. But we're doing this in absolute silence. I know that's probably not what they had in mind on the webcast or whatever, but it's for a point, right? Give it a good 3 minutes. Finish your thought in complete and utter silence. Maybe meditate on what the silence means if you want, but now that that got you going, do that.
For me, creativity is just who I am. Like, it's more natural for me to create than it is to play football.
I count 2 guns.
Okay. So how many of you came from work? Directly from work, right? A lot of you did. Some of you have been working nonstop. So how many of you had some serious stuff on your mind before you got here? Okay. What did the music trigger for you, if anything? What effect did it have on you? You can, it's all right to talk out loud. It's all right. What did it trigger for you? Anyone? You were relaxed, of course, yes. What else? Right. Yeah. Yes. It was what now? It kind of calmed you down, right? What about the silence? Did the silence do anything for you? Yeah. Yeah. Tells you to listen. What else? Right. That's very true. So I have some poems there for you. that I just, no, not those. That big old stack right there. Yeah, let's pass those out. And you can pass these around on your side. Make sure you get Sarah in the back there. So, you're gonna find I am as free-flowing, free-form a teacher as it gets. I have some things I want to say. I have a couple of things I would like to talk about with you about Nuyorican poetics, and a couple of poems that I'd like to show you, one of which is in your hand. The reason I chose that particular piece of music is because it's a piece called Blue and Green by Miles Davis. It's one of the greatest, I think, one of the greatest jazz compositions of all time. It's very bluesy, and it has one of the saddest sort of evocative phrases in all of the Western canon, which is that spare note at the beginning, that wah, wah, wah. Like it says everything and nothing at the same time. And Nuyorican, well, we're gonna get into that. What you have in front of you is a poem by a poet named Keith Roach. What many of you don't know is that Nuyorican poetics, one of the greatest Nuyorican poets of all time was not Puerto Rican at all. And that's Keith Roach. Okay? Keith Roach passed away on November 8th. We buried him on Saturday. We had a funeral for him. And from about 1995 to 2000, he was what is known as a slam master at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. And slam is a competitive, sort of a competitive art form around poetics, around poetry. And Keith used to bring people off the audience, out of the open mic and into the slam, folks who didn't ever think that they'd be able to perform this stuff, and just got something out of them that they didn't know they had. And that's the essence of a good teacher, right? And that's the essence, I think, of Nuyorican poetics, which is that every story, no matter what the circumstance, no matter where your particular station in life may be, every story, in a sense, matters, right? Every poem, every child is born a poet. That's a phrase that was given to us by a Nuyorican poet named Perry Thomas, right? Let's start this way. Let's go around a little bit and tell me your name, tell me how you got to poetry, and tell me where you're from, okay? We'll start in the back with that disinterested young lady with the pahong. Sarah Serrano, tell us. Trauma brought you to poetry. Would you care to elaborate a little bit or no? So it was an outlet for your trauma. Where are you from? Okay. What part of Brooklyn? Brooklyn's a big place. Bushwick is the operative word. Bushwick. Even saying it has a certain Bushwick. You know? Word. All right. This young lady right here. What's your name? Where you from? And what brought you to poetry? All right. What part of Queens? Elmhurst. All right. Not quite as threatening as Bushwick, but still pretty, still pretty gully. It's all good. Boredom brought you to poetry. Okay. It was a boredom reliever for you. All right. Cool. This young lady here. South Bronx, South Bronx. All right. Okay. Uh-huh. Aha. So the poetry is sort of an intellectual exercise in the art of herbology for you. That's also an interesting string, I think, that happens in Nuyorican poetics as well. Maybe a little bit unfortunate, but it is what it is. Sir. Uh-huh. I'm not from that man is right there. All right, cool. Yeah. Yeah. All right. The teacher hopefully encouraged you to keep writing, though. That's a good thing. You know, for every negative action, there's a positive reaction. That's a good thing. You, sir. All right. What brought you to writing? Yes. I like how he tried to slip past that. He was just like, maybe I'll just get under the radar. No, sir. You know. A lie brought you to poetry. That's also a big theme. Not just in New Eurekan poetics, but in most poetry. Go ahead. Yeah. Yes, I do. Right. Here you are today. Sometimes a lie is a redemptive thing. It is not always. So for those of you who are of younger persuasion in this room, please do not follow his example. Don't lie. Drugs are bad. And we'll find out what other, and stay in school. We'll find out what other vices are happening as we go around. What part of Queens? Jackson Heights. Next to Elmhurst. All right.
Some of the old songs. Yes, ma'am.
Grief and trauma. So the theme is emerging here. Okay. Okay. Young lady in the purple. Aha. Yes, you did. Not, she's family. So you rep Peru and Chile and West New York and Cleveland and a couple other places. And East New York, Brooklyn. Right. It's all good. So what brought you to poetry? What brought you to writing? Hip hop. That is also a theme in New Eurekan poetry. You'll find in spoken word generally is a lot of the folks that you see now in the hip hop genre started out as poets, including the host of Def Poetry. Most Def is definitely a poet, right? We'll see him in one of the clips I'll show. But yes, hip hop brought you, and it brings a lot of folks. All right. You, young lady. Hi. All right. Very cool. All right. Spoken word and struggle. What's the difference between spoken word and poetry? Yeah. So poetry is a very, very big term, which we'll get into. Spoken word is another very big term, which we'll get into. You know, the terminologies will sort of demystify a little bit, hopefully. Yes. Wahi. Primo. Bueno, primo. Dale. Go ahead. To what? Right. Okay. Right. Okay. This table back here. Let's start with you. Yes. Awesome. Awesome. All right. Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, poetry is one of those things that they teach you to hate. You know, they teach you that it's completely inaccessible, particularly to people of color, right? That's the Queen's language. That's the Queen's English, and you're not supposed to write in Spanish and Spanglish. They make you hate the shit. And then you get to spoken word, and you figure out, oh, she just walked out. Then you get to spoken word, and you figure out there's a whole new life, right? So welcome. They be telling you about a lot of things: novels, music. It's low art versus high art. It's an age-old argument, but it's all BS. Yes. Hi. All right. Ah. Okay. Very cool. Last but not least, Mr. Supreme, talk to me. Okay. All right. What part of Florida? Orlando. My parents are in Orlando. They might be watching right now, as a matter of fact. So say hi to Gus and Jane. So how old are you? Awesome. All right. When I was 14, I was not writing poetry. I'll put it to you that way. I was trying to deconstruct all the crazy religious education I was getting. Talk about trauma. So, yeah, no, seriously. Trauma is a big theme that comes up whenever we write poetry specifically. There's a way out of it. And the way out of some of these things that traumatize us is, as Vanessa Martir puts it, the essayist and memoirist extraordinaire who may be watching as well. The only way out is in. Okay. Static. Right. What's that? The machine rebellion has already started. That's fantastic. Well, see, there's a prompt for you. The machine rebellion. So what we're here to talk about is something called Nuyorican poetics. Right? How many of you have ever heard of the Nuyorican Poets Cafe? Some of you have. All of you have. When you hear the word Nuyorican, what does that conjure for you about poetry? Those of you who have a little bit of knowledge about it. And even those of you who don't. What does the word Nuyorican mean to you? You can take that in a literal sense or in a figurative sense. Yes. A movement. Yes. What else? Yes. An identity. Right. Absolutely. What else does Nuyorican evoke for you? Yeah. Spanish Harlem. Down these mean streets. Right. Okay. Anything else what else does it evoke for you? Yes. Protest. Resistance culture. These are all very excellent terms and pretty much set the stage for what I want to tell you about it. So Nuyorican is a portmanteau. Portmanteau is a word that is smashed together to mean one thing. New York, Puerto Rican. Puerto Ricans got to New York, found it too friggin' cold, and decided to make a new identity out of the shit that they found themselves in. One of the centers, the epicenters of the Nuyorican movement was the Lower East Side. And here we find ourselves. Resistance is part of it. Sure. Identity is part of it. But one of the biggest drivers of New Eurekan literature, and indeed one of the biggest drivers of the building that we're sitting in right here, is something that all of you guys mentioned. Trauma. Right? Why does the Abrons Art Center exist? Why does Henry Street Settlement exist? Grand Street Settlement? Why do all these settlement houses exist? To combat something called systemic poverty, right? This is a thing that you learn when you get to social work school, that systemic poverty is a thing and it informs everybody's outlook on life. And most of us in this room, in one way or another, have been touched by it. And that in and of itself is a big trauma. And that is part and parcel, I believe, of a lot of the New Eurekan experience. To understand the New Eurekan experience, you got to understand the Puerto Rican experience. And to understand the Puerto Rican existence and experience, you have to understand a little bit of something called colonialism. Okay? And a little bit of the history of Puerto Rico. In 1868, Puerto Rico was a colony of Spain. In other words, it was basically a client state of a country called Spain. That was Puerto Rico, right? 1868 rolled around and people didn't want that anymore. They decided that they wanted something different. And so there was something called the Grito de Lares, which was one of the first major uprisings for the independence movement and for the movement against this thing called colonialism, which is generally, tyranny, naked tyranny toward a people. Some of the first presses in Puerto Rico were independence-minded presses. In other words, when they brought in the printing press to Puerto Rico, some of the first things that were coming off this printing press was independence-minded literature. There was an entire intellectual class in the early 1900s especially that was independence-minded. Puerto Rico switched their colonial masters from Spain to the United States. And neither one of them liked this independence class very much. So there was an exile of an entire class of intellectuals from Puerto Rico. And most of them came to Nueva York, which happens to be the biggest town in PR, which is in Nueva York. And we settled where? Spanish Harlem, Lower East Side, Los Sures. And we formulated a brand new identity here. It was informed by things like parrandas in the snow. It's an unnatural act for most Puerto Ricans that you know, right? Parrandas happen on the island of Puerto Rico in the heat. But we brought that stuff up north. And we have now these places called Cuchifritos on 116th, right? Casa Adela over here in the Lower East Side. And you have these things, there's a whole new sensory experience going on, especially around the food. I mean, Christmas is coming, right? Puerto Ricans eat a lot of pasteles on Christmas time. There's these steamy, husky things that pop up. It is absolutely glorious. And the experience of a steamed pastel in the middle of December, in a sense, is traumatic for us. And it began a movement of intellectual thought of looking back, not just on the food, obviously, but on the culture, of the fact that we had to do something called forced migration, right? And we had to make an entirely new experience out of it. Now, some of our poets that came up in this movement in the 60s and 70s had their enclaves on the Lower East Side and El Barrio, but there was one place in particular that came up in the Lower East Side and in Los Sures called the New Eurekan Movement, and it was led by a group of poets who were a little bit local, right? And they all crowded into the living room of this dude named Miguel Algarin. And Miguel decided that he didn't want these people in his living room no more. They moved to a spot on 6th Street, which is still there, right? It's something else now. But the building is still there. And they called it the New Eurekan Poets Cafe, right? And depending who you ask, the term New Eurekan is either 100 years old or 10 years old. Kind of depends on the critic at the time. But what we do know is that there were a bunch of folks in different open mics and different movable feasts, as it were, that were calling what they did New Eurekan poetry, right? And a lot of the themes were exactly of that, politics, right? Because it was a political thing that took us from our homes in Puerto Rico and brought us over here, right? A lot of it was surrealism, the surrealist imagery that happens when you take a people from one place and you plop them into another, right? And there's also a theme of mixing that happens. The New Eurekan movement and the Black Arts movement, which was the arts movement that was the sort of the literary arm of the Black Power movement, in a lot of ways are inseparable. So we say, those of us who are scholars of New Eurekan poetry, that our stuff and the Black Power movement sort of ran hand in hand. This is why I say that some of the greatest New Eurekan poets were folks who were never Puerto Rican at all. And you have in front of you an example of that. This is a poem called Rice Wine by Keith Roach. And there are some others as well, which I'd like to give to you as well. Can I get that stack that's over there by the table? Those two, right. Okay. Let's pass these both out. There's two poems here. One is called Traffic Misdirector by a poet named Pedro Pietri. And one is called A Dream for Aman by Sekou Sundiata. All right. So when we get these pieces, let me get a copy of oh, when it comes back around, I get a copy of A Dream for Aman. Right. Thank you. Cool. Do we have any Pietri? Yeah, it's coming around. We are efficient. We are getting the poems where they need to go. Let me get a copy of the Pietri one too. I'll read that too. All right. So let's start with the earliest one in the stack, which is Pedro Pietri and a poem called Traffic Misdirector, which I'll read for you. And take note of the imagery that could only happen in one particular neighborhood, in one particular point of history, right? Traffic Misdirector. The greatest living poet in New York City was born in Puerto Rico. His name is Jorge Brandon. He is over 70 years old. He carries his metaphor in brown shopping bags inside steel shopping cart he travels around with on the streets of Manhattan. He recites his poetry to whoever listens. And when nobody is around, he recites to himself. He speaks the wisdom of unforgettable palm trees, the vocabulary of coconuts that wear overcoats. The traffic lights of his poems function without boring advice from AC or DC current. Bookstores and libraries are deprived of his vibes. To become familiar with this immortal poet, you have to hang out on street corners, building stoops, rooftops, fire escapes, bars, parks, subway train stations, bodegas, botanicas, iglesias, pawn shops, card games, cockfights, funerals, Valencia Bakery, Hunts Point Palace, pool halls, Orchard Beach, and Cuchifrito stands on the Lower East Side. The admission is free. His presence is poetry. All right. Coconuts that wear overcoats. That's a surrealist term. Pedro was among the best in that sort of like crazy surrealist language. They call Jorge Brandon, the poet who is described in this poem, as El Coco que habla. And he is considered the first New Eurekan street poet that we can really document. And he taught all these guys and women, because there is an unfortunate strain of misogyny that happens in New Eurekan poetry as well. All right, let's be real. Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. But we know that Jorge Brandon kind of grabbed these títeres off the street and said, okay, you're going to do some poetry. You're going to do a little different, right? El Coco que habla wore overcoats. Yeah. The traffic lights of his poems function without boring advice from AC or DC current, right? So his poems were doing something a little different than most poems you hear, again, this was an experience for most of these men and women in a new place, and their parents came from different places, new places, into this like department store. What Pietri called it that. He said this department store called America, right? So let's move on to the next one. This is called A Dream for Aman by Sekou Sundiata. Sekou Sundiata was, this is the part where we demystify some of these terms. Spoken word. He's considered the forerunner of the spoken word movement, right? Sekou Sundiata didn't write down a lot of these poems like for publication. A lot of the stuff you see on CD. He performed a lot of this stuff in theater settings. The New Eurekan movement is a theater movement. That's why theater and New Eurekan poetry goes so well together, right? That's why we had these really amazing events with Oye Group, because the stuff just kind of goes hand in hand. So Sekou wrote a lot of this stuff for theater, right? But this is poetry. This is Shakespeare, right? We know this stuff. Shakespeare is the first theater poet, right? The first theater, the first poet who brought poetry to theater since Homer. Yeah. A Dream for Aman by Sekou Sundiata. This is an example of something called an ars poetica, right? You had a surreal poem on one side, and you had an ars poetica on this side. I am talking to a boy who is trying to master the art of staying awake, balancing hard facts of daily living against the smooth, cloudless mind in the making. I can tell by the way he suddenly laughs in his sleep, throws up a high five, and signifies his descent into the kingdom of myth where the world is forming behind his eyes. He points at me and calls me bird, snow, rain. I tell him I heard that half the species of birds in America migrate to the city, that the egrets and ibises favor the water around Rikers Island, that the woodcocks are knocking boots in the Bronx. It's a whole way of life. I try to be upfront with the boy, so I admit that I never saw the birds coming. Aside from a few jittery sparrows, I always thought the pigeon should be our official bird for the way it shits on the good, the bad, and the people sitting on the fence. Anyway, I say, the birds probably came here for the same reasons as his great-grandparents, for the nest and the work, for the food and culture. When we go to the park, he will call out sponge for sky and make the sound of sucking wind through a straw to say traffic. I will tell him what it was like when he was born. There were so many mornings we awoke to the blessed silence of snow falling on snow. And there were cold rains that rained on days when the snow couldn't make it. Like that one faithful soprano that shows up over the Palisades and sits in for the whole galaxy when the moon's period is late and holding back. And now the drought has choked the grass back to dust, and we will have to save water this summer. Yet just below the dry dirt surface, the soil is still moist from winter. The garlic in backyard Brooklyn is growing well. There are reports that the Samara seeds have come to root. When he falls asleep in the stroller, I will put headphones over his ears and play Monk as he dozes, hoping he will dream in ascending intervals and practice his first steps, walking unfettered in the space of slumber. I will talk to him over the music. Listen, son, I can't tell one tree from another. I'm only telling you what I've heard. I don't know how the winter snow and rain knew to go deep into the soil and drain out slowly because the following spring would be dry. And I don't know how those birds know exactly what to do. There is nothing in me to match that. But I do know this native tongue you speak, in which saying is believing. So I tell you now that the earth is made of matter, but the world is made of words. He points at me again and calls me Blue. So, I think what I'd like to do, you guys have the rice wine poem too, right? So, we're going to save that one. Let me get that laptop that's right there. No, not that one. That one. There's two. Right. See, I have a job now, right? A regular job in which they hand you a laptop and expect you to use it to do intakes with clients, right? So now I walk around with not one but two separate laptops. fun stuff. But the reason I'm going to bring this out is because one of the major drivers of New Eurekan poetry is live performance. And often what happens is, in addition to live performance, you see these artists doing things with the visual. And Elizabeth Velasquez is one of those poets who does both. Elizabeth is an amazing writer, an amazing poet. She was supposed to be here, but she's not. I see you. Yeah. So, but her writing is phenomenal. And she is, I think, the latest sort of incarnation in this thing called New Eurekan poetry. She's another Boricua poet from Bushwick, and wrote a poem in the political imagination called Elephant. And I'd like to show that to you if you haven't seen it already. There are two things that are being addressed on a systemic level. Number one is this thing called street harassment. Those of you who are of the female persuasion understand this without having to be told about it. Those of you with a male persuasion, hopefully you'll get it eventually, all right? But this is a thing that women live with. The other thing that I think she deals with just by being alive is sort of undoing that unfortunate legacy of the New Eurekan movement, which is the misogynistic treatment of the women writers within it. Go read Sandra Maria Esteves, Magdalena Gomez, Mirna Nieves. There's an entire pantheon of female writers from the New Eurekan movement. There's a lady called Lorraine Sutton who hardly gets mentioned, but is actually the first New Eurekan poet to ever publish a book and is considered part of that movement, right? So there you go. I'd like to kind of cut the soundtrack if I could so I can get folks to listen. We didn't have an overhead projector, so I'm going to kind of serve as the projector and just kind of like, you know, show the video to you. And it'll be a little hard to hear, so if you guys want to get closer to it. Can we? Oh, okay. Then let's do that. We can plug it into the sound. Actually, you know what? You can pull it up on YouTube if you want. If you go to YouTube and search Elephant Choreo Film, you'll probably find it. Ah, look at that. And just let me know when it. Here's what I'll do. So I'll start it. Huh? Choreo poem? Yeah. Hold on one second. Can we start from the top?
My way.
Yes. Go ahead. Huh? Okay. All right. Hang on to that for a second. All right, can you guys see from here? All right, cool.
Sometimes I walk down the street and my body is a chapel. The men who think they have holy water for saliva spit blessings my way. I guess I dress like a sin today. I guess I help someone break a commandment or 10 by being a woman with a body of water most men are not Moses enough for. Sometimes I walk down the street and the men, they call me beautiful. And depending on their tone, this either makes me feel like art or a cheap exhibit. I've learned that when a woman's body is a dialect that a man cannot speak, how quick his hands become sign language, how quick my skirt becomes signal for touch me. Sometimes I walk down the street and I am a 3-ring circus. The men, they think me lying in a cage, underestimate the sharp in my teeth. I say I am big and ferocious. They say you are big and insecure. They say watch your mouth, fat girl. They say fat girl like it's an insult. Like I've never drowned men in between these thighs. Like they mad they don't know how to swim. Like they didn't know that the elephant is the main attraction at the circus for the way its body resembles cement and feather simultaneously. I be floating. I be sky and concrete. I be a woman that looks like heaven, but tastes like a broken sidewalk. So I get why they be tripping, why I be hoe, why I be bitch, why I be fat. Cause I be anything but theirs. So the next time I walk down the street like a chapel, you make sure you see God in this woman. You keep your hands clasped like a prayer that I'm never gonna answer. Confess your sins to your mother, the first deity you ever blasphemed against. See if she forgives you. See if she has more room in her uterus for you than I do. You could never be born again in between these thighs or be baptized in this wet. The next time I walk down the street like a piece of art, you make sure you see a museum in this woman. I am a collection of body parts that your tongue will never curate. The next time I walk down the street like a 3-ring circus, you make sure you are more freak show than Cannonball. So I've always respected a man who can swallow his pride like a sword than one that shoots off at the mouth and always misses.
Facilitating the next workshop. So you can consider it sort of a continuation of this. But she's going to bring an entirely different perspective, hopefully for you guys. And that's, what day is that? December 18th, right. We're not going to do it like right before Christmas, hopefully. So here's your writing assignment. Because, of course, all this leads to a writing assignment, right? Okay. We looked at 3 different types of poems, all which fall within the Nuyorican tradition. We looked at a surrealist poem, which uses imagery that is a little bit off the wall. Okay? We looked at a poem called an Ars Poetica, which is a dream for Ahman. What is an Ars Poetica? It is what the poet interprets to be the purpose of poetry. Right? That's the kind of poem that we saw with that. Okay? And then we had the poem that calls out a particular political stance. Unpopular as it may be, women-centered as it may be, but it is a political stance nonetheless. All 3 of these things are the essence of Nuyorican poetry. Your assignment is to write one of them. Okay? Whichever one you choose to do. Okay? There are a couple of parameters I would like you to impose on this poem. Number 1, write from a particular place. Whether it's your hometown, your home borough, your home neighborhood, but make it as particular a place as possible. How do you do that? Include some imagery from that particular place. right? Maybe assume the vernacular of that particular place, because vernacular speech is another big tradition within the canons of the Nuyorican movement and the spoken word phenomenon, right? Write from a particular emotion that place gives you, right? So it's got to be a poem that has something to do with a particular place. And should you choose, I'm not going to make you do it because it's a hard thing to do emotionally, but one that unpacks a certain trauma, right? Because that is the essence of Nuyorican poetry too. It's in saying the unsayable. So pick one unsayable thing, write it from your particular place, and write it in one of these three forms. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Ars Poetica, which is the art of poetry. It's a Latin for art of poetry, which is your interpretation of the purpose of poetry. Okay? The other form is a surrealist poem, which is one that incorporates imagery that is, for lack of a better term, a little off the wall. Things that don't seem to make sense, like Dali, precisely. Okay? And the third form is the political poem, a straight up political polemic, right? One that reveals something that maybe is politically unpopular, but one that is true to you. So you represent your truth. It may not be anybody else's truth, but it is your truth. Okay? Make sense? Okay. You're going to spend the next 20 minutes or so, okay, writing down this particular poem. It does not have to rhyme. It does not have to have a particular syllable count. You do not have to write a sestina or a villanelle or any of those European forms. We're not doing European forms tonight. We're doing Nuyorican forms. That's what we do. Okay? And at the end of those 20 minutes, we will transition into the open mic, where you will get to speak. All right? So at the end of this, you will have the beginnings of two amazing poems. One which is the one you started on the music prompt, and one which is the one you started here. And for those of you who complain very rightly about not having time to write poems, you have written two by the end of this night. So in 2 hours. So those of us who have jobs like I do, you have to learn to make do with the time that you got. All right? So get started, and we will hear these poems soon. And let the music take you to another place. Esotericness. Okay, I'll stop now.
Simply write checking from Santander Bank. Just make one deposit, withdraw.
J'espère que ça va continuer comme ça.
C'est important quand même.
Rice wine. In a quiet little room full of keepsakes is a bottle of rice wine. It is saved for some certain guests who will laugh at the common foibles as quickly as they will forget sitting around a kitchen table that wobbles just enough to keep elbows off and manners intact. Stories and quick sayings batted back and forth even as the wine and winemaker are praised. The sweetness loosens the laughter and beckons another for the road. Life is of the wondrous and silly, haunting desire and memory. We sit at this table, and the world spins a bit faster, changing skies as often as the stories change to engage non-participants who are still amazed at this wine that is homemade and saved for the friends who want the adventure as well as the remembering, calling the ghosts of other acquaintances who would have enjoyed the wine and the tale of its becoming, and how it was that this sweet drink happened just for this occasion. Keith Roach. So, Keith, as I said, was a teacher, a mentor, a lover of jazz music, and the long-running slam master at the New Eurekan Poets Cafe. And this poem is available online. Now you all have it in your collection. I'll give this back to you shortly. What it evokes, right, is all of these different things out of one object, right? There might be an object like that at home for you, in your gardens maybe, or in a place that you call dear. There's an object that evokes all these different kinds of memories. The exercise I was not able to get to was exactly that. Pick an object that is close to you, that you've imbued with a lot of different memories. Something that is older, maybe older than 15 years, say. Rice wine is also something that ages, right? Think about the things it evokes and try to, make something of that. Oftentimes, I think we get caught up, especially those of us of the political persuasion, we get caught up in writing just the poems of the moment. And we say, oh, I have to write about this political thing. Oh, I have to write about this. Honestly, you can write about anything. As long as it comes from something deep inside of you, right? Those stories are a way of mastering the exterior order. Clemente Soto Vélez, who was another famous Puerto Rican poet, who was a forerunner of the New Eurekan movement before there was a New Eurekan movement. He was a Puerto Rican poet in New York, another surrealist writer. He said that in order to master the exterior order, one must master the interior order. And that's how, that is what it means to become a poet. It's to set fire to humanity, right? And you do so by this very Zen-like thing of just mastering yourself, right? And seeing how much of the universe you can pull out of one object. That's really the essence of it. So if you go away with something tonight, understand that sometimes the most mundane of objects is imbued with something that you give it. And that story is worthy of being told, right? You don't have to have a master's degree in poetry. You don't have to have a particular educational milieu. You don't have to listen to the men telling you to can it. You don't have to listen to your family telling you that this doesn't make any money. As long as you have something that is yours, it's already priceless, right? So with that in mind, let's move into the performance part of the New Eurekan poetry lesson that we've engaged in. First of all, give yourselves a round of applause for being here. Yes. Who wants to go first? All right, give it up for Joaquin. Keep clapping until he gets up here. You should have walked slower. Yes.
Don't die. Hi, everybody. My name is Joaquin. I'm the production manager for Oya Group. And sometimes I like to throw something together. So to get us started, this is it. They say I should welcome gentrification. It made the neighborhood safer with positive change. Safer for whom? I knew all the drug dealers and junkies. Made $200 every summer pissing in a cup for the next dude on parole. Only thing gentrification did was take away Jerry's, best pizza in Brooklyn, and introduce Yelp. Pfft, fucking Yelp, man. A place for disgruntled, sugar-glassed, emotioned hipsters to express in epic poem form everything their privileged asses didn't like about every establishment that was lucky to have them. From pizzerias to bodegas to subways and even subway stations. The only place, besides playing numbers in the bodega, that I was allowed to go to alone as a kid. Me and my cousins would beg for pizza, not only because it was delicious, but because it represented our freedom. That pizza raised us, watched us become men and women, made us proud of Brooklyn pizza. Now Yelp says permanently closed with 2 stars. Fuck you, Tanner. Your rating gives me indigestion, 0 stars. Thank you.
Give it one more time for Joaquin. Who's next on the mic? We could do this the easy way or we could do it the hard way. I can start picking people from tables because as the instructor, that is my privilege. Huh? All right. Mari se fue, está aquí. Mira, give it up for Maria. And keep the applause going until she arrives on the stage. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little short.
That's all right, Shorty Wop. You got you. I got you. Don't worry.
5 feet 0 inches. Yes.
5 feet high and rising.
Good evening. Okay, so I'm not. I mean, we're workshopping, right? I'm just a little nervous because we all live and online and all that stuff. Okay. Tongue-tied, stuttering never, didn't want them to see the trouble of her bass. She prepared, she thought, to battle any MC who'd step up. She was nice, they said. She was dope, she hoped. She was his next conquest, he'd later boast. Like a typical colonizer, he rode upon her shores, got all up in her jaws, said he was about to go off on this broad. He let out a huge roar. She ain't flinch. She was used to this. Traumatic memories, silencing tragedies, scars made her numb. Used to all the synonyms of dumb. Vocab full of ammo, lips loaded. Click, click, bang, bang. Damn, that was close, kid. He looked appalled, embarrassed that her words could disperse so much hurt that actually worked. Eye blood vessels burst, leaking fury. But he lost. To himself, the only jury. He continued to address her in every which way, misogynistic style, stripping her of her voice. He could only attack what he could see. Lips, tits, hips, targets were easy. He knew, she knew, he was the whack MC. Another body for her sleeve, another body in his sleep. He only wished, so he lied. He claimed he somersaulted off her thighs, wrote some of her rhymes, said she cried when he wouldn't make her mine, yours. What's the score? Another male MC laid out on the floor. That's the difference between me and you. I believed her, and you still asking for the proof. Thank you.
All right. You want to go? I think we have our next poet. Give it up for Tammy. It's about to be fire up in this motherfucker. Keep on going until she's here. Come on. All right.
I had to write like 2 little pieces because the way my mind works, it can never focus on one, so bear with me. I'm from where the ground cracks into a scully court. A place where little girls learn to be magic. We learned how to turn 100-foot telephone cords into double Dutch ropes, where dollar vans are really 150, where Utica, where they pop gums just as hard as they pop project building doors, where everyone in is just trying to make it out and everyone out just wants to come in, and suddenly where chaos once lived, safety and peace come gentrification is funny style like that. But no, Tammy, where are you really from? That was the first thing, and then I went off on a tangent and started writing about why I can't write, and this came. I thought this shit was supposed to be easy. That there was supposed to be a dictionary in these hands. And that the words would fall from my pen whenever I asked them to. I'm learning that poetry is a disobedient child. That sometimes I am an unsafe foster home and my mind is an abusive parent. I beat these words instead of building them and wonder why I get writer's block. There is no ACS for this moleskin.
Thank you, Tammy. One more time. One more time for Tammy, yes. Rebecca, all right. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Rebecca. Come on, come on. That's a man that follows instructions. I said, keep it clapping until she gets up here, and he did. All right.
Hello, or as the spider in Charlotte's Web says, salutations. I work in a children's library, and I saw Charlotte's Web today. Anyway, as you may have or may have not noticed, I am not skinny. And when you are in a family, well, at least in my Dominican experience, not being skinny is not a good thing. And that has caused me a lot of grief in my life. My loved ones love to sharpen their tongues on my flesh. Tu ta gorda is a common refrain. They are doing me a favor, they tell me, when they try to strip my flesh from my body, when they cut me down to size with their razor blade tongues. I sit in a middle-aged lady's living room, waiting to be forced into the cage. I'm doing it to please Mother. She desires to confine my flesh for my own good. The appearance of thinness means health. If I am diminished, I will be fine. The lady tells me how to smooth my rolls of flesh down and into the cage. She tells me to contort my chest into a pointy bra. My clothing does not fit right. It is far too loose. We want to help you, my loved ones tell me. It is why they abuse me with their words. They want to save my flat flesh. When I am skinny, will I finally be free? The internet tells me it is okay to be fat, that fat is beautiful, that I can look at my naked body without disgust. I do not live in dread of the moment where I take off my clothes. I will not let the word fat be weaponized against me. No one will cut me down with razor tongues.
In case you haven't noticed, I can relate. Give it up one more time for Rebecca. Thank you, sis. All right. Who's next on the mic? Who's next on the mic? Anybody? Who's next? I ain't gonna make you get up here, but I mean, you know, Tina, right? Tina, right? Yes? Nod, yeah, all right. Give it up for Tina! They listen now. Are you good?
Yeah.
Right here. Okay, cool.
The first day in the island of your idealistic dreams, you walk from ocean parks and its sky is named for generals who couldn't give less of a mierda about your soul search. Your I haven't been here since I was 7, and Abuela left the chick she bought us out in the sun. Until we awoke excited to play with them, and instead were greeted by ants crawling in and out of sun-singed carcasses. Chickens that would never engordar and feed the patrons of Grand Abuela's Jibaro restaurant. So I walked along beaches that had never known my drunken abuelo from Humacao, hadn't known my paternal abuela from Cabo Rojo. My Dominican abuelo found her before my Dominican abuelo found her water-laden heart and left the generational curse of an unattainable love. The mal de ojo that breached birth spat me back here. I loved a man con madre santera, siempre en blanco. Ella me decía in cancer delirium, you have a gun, no mates a mi hijo, por favor. She died in the room next to ours. We slept as the EMTs carried her do not resuscitate cuerpo in its bolsa negro into the ambulance. I loved you in ways I love an island that doesn't know my surname. So I walk from Ocean Park to Viejo San Juan. I find a mic to scream the loss of you into, clad in white. I read from a notebook stained in Nuyorican tears, salted with Dominican mujeriego perdido. I miss you. I miss both you and a home that has never known me. The remembrance of your trigueño skin is scented with both my abandonment and becoming. These blisters I carry to New York remind me of open wounds caused by traveling the difficult way. Relearning the poetry in a pulse, in painful impulse, in implausible trips.
All right. Thank you, Tina. All right, we're going to kind of hurry this up because we got to get everybody in who wants to go. So who's next? Anybody? Well, maybe, you know, anybody from this side of the room, perhaps? You want to go? All right, what's your name again? Give it up for Jasmine. And keep clapping until she gets up here. That's right. That's right. You take your turn in the spotlight. That's what I'm talking about.
Walk through the lobby. Walk up 3 flights of stairs. Follow the smell of stew chicken to the door. The mouths are convening, spilling family history onto the plastic protected table, as well as questions about your love life. Watch it drip down to where you are standing, and while trying not to stumble over the rhythm of knife against glass bottle. Plant your feet into the carpet next to the TV sitting in the corner, waxing nostalgic for Joe Torre in between hushing the mouths of the table with static that sounds like, "Leave the child alone." Breathe in the scent of stewed chicken and oral tradition. Sink into the plush carpet. Remain overstimulated. Make no plans to move.
Yeah. Next up on the mic. Anybody? Yes. My coworker, community navigator. Give it up for Maribel.
This is a little long.
What's that?
It's a little long.
That's a little long? Good. That's all good.
Good evening, everyone. I am from the Bronx that became burned out, broken, like the bottles strewed on the street. It was the 1970s and I was a teen. I had been on Beck Street by Longwood Avenue as a kid. But we moved to the Morrisania section mid-60s when Popa en Nueva York was on TV and Esmeralda was a novela. Puerto Ricans were many, but many of us were morenos, like Peary Thomas, who I discovered in the 8th grade at Junior High School 22. I did not understand the racial divide of Puerto Ricans who did not like the morenos and vice versa. But we're all the same, I told myself in my head. They just don't speak Spanish. And our parents did not speak English. But I loved Marvin Gaye and cried when he died. I admired Martin Luther King Jr., and I read Down These Mean Streets and thought, how mean is my dad because he don't like morenos and I'm in school with them. And then I discovered Joe Bataan came on the scene with his version of Shaft, and Joe Cuba did Bang Bang, and Ah Beep Beep was heard through the neighborhood, and the boys played stickball and the girls jumped rope. And I was stuck inside the confines of the brick walls and the concrete that was Morris Avenue because my dad was a male chauvinist pig who didn't believe that girls playing on the street. Then David Cassidy was on TV along with the Brady Bunch, but I love Room 222 most of all. And The White Shadow came along and I ran away as the Bronx burned. Though that look is gone, many still picture the Bronx that way. And though I live in Washington Heights today, I will always love the Bronx, for my formation happened there. And I still stare out into the city from my window in the Heights and recall mi querido Bronx and Buster Brown's shoes and Alexander's on 3rd Avenue. Oye, Rican, black and proud, I love you, my Bronx, my beautiful boogie down and loved space and place from my long ago childhood. Grateful, thankful, I learned to believe in God in the South Bronx. Hallelujah.
Where you from, though? South Bronx. South Bronx. South Bronx. All right. Who's next to the mic? Who we got? Who wants to go after that? I mean, you know, anybody can go after that because, you know, it's all love in here. It's all love. It's all sharing. We have time for one more? Okay. We have time for one more. All right. Come on up. Mariana. Give it up for Mariana. Y'all ain't ready. I'm just telling you right now. Come on up. Come on up.
I'm good.
It's all good. This is good for you, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I know.
So this is a letter from my mom in prison that she never wrote. Marianita, I'm writing to you from two graves. One that I was buried in alive, and the other my final resting place in a box the color of a cloudless sky, tucked away under your TV in your living room. My spirit has made its way to your hands to pen this letter that I never gave you. It's a place named after a man. Sorry. You see, Marianita, I've written this letter many times in my head for my first grave, an island. A small one you might have remembered that the cops told you, or maybe your brothers. It's a place named after a man who owned slaves, people who look like us, and the women here, the women here, the women here. Please don't become the women here. Please don't become me. Mariana, I am ashamed in this graveyard named Rikers. I am ashamed of this place. I am ashamed of what I have become. I am ashamed of my crime, this crime of a fat brown body that didn't know how to become a warm home for you, even if only through my sturdy fingertips. I'm ashamed of leaving that graveyard, a summer of 1996, only to make you a coffin out of your 9-year-old's body, a place to hold my traumas and make a new home for myself, because death was all I knew. So from this second grave, I tell you, Marianita, resurrect me however you can, even the parts that never lived. Keep that Dead Sea flowing, baby girl. Make the sun keep rising, mija. And remember the women, the women, the women, the women that are in your path. Just remember that that is a wish granted from the universe when it asked me, how many should I send her? All of them, I told it.
Guys, give yourself a hand. Everybody, give yourselves a hand. Oh, I just broke it. All right. Yeah, guys, I don't know if you've been seeing this, but Mr. Ryan Lopez has been painting all day today, and it's come out like, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. Usually his father does it, and his son showed up, and it's just killing it. All right, so guys, give it up for Ryan Lopez. Yeah. His little brother's here writing too, so yeah. All right. Yeah, all the people here. It's cool. Guys, bring your family next time, right? On behalf of Oya Group and Abrons Art Center, my name is Joaquin. That's Arts and Rhymes. I want to thank you guys all for coming, and please join us for the next time with Elizabeth. So you'll be here next month. All right? Yeah, everybody's like, woo! Yeah. On the 18th, December 18th. All right? Guys, give yourselves a hand. Free everything just like today. Free food, free drink, that down to drink, cash bar, notebooks, all right? Guys, have a good night. Round of applause, everybody.